What's your call sign, old man?
Ghost lead.
What's your call sign, old man? The lieutenant's voice cut through the control room, sharp and amused, carrying just enough edge to draw a few quiet chuckles from the younger airmen nearby, the kind of laughter that came easy when confidence hadn't yet been tested, when rank still felt like armor instead of responsibility, and in the center of it all stood Daniel Reeves, silent, still, almost out of place against the glow of digital panels and polished steel consoles that hummed softly under the low ceiling, the steady pulse of a modern command center alive with data streams and system diagnostics, screens casting pale blue light across faces too young to recognize what they were looking at, because Reeves didn't look like much, not at first glance, just an older man in a worn field jacket that had seen more years than most of the personnel in the room, his posture relaxed but grounded, like someone who had long ago learned that stillness could carry more weight than noise, his eyes drifting slowly across the room. Not searching, not nervous, just observing, as if he were measuring something none of them could see, and that quiet presence only seemed to irritate Lieutenant Ethan Cole more, because silence didn't fit the narrative he had already built in his head, didn't match the expectation of confusion or apology he thought he deserved, so he stepped closer, boots tapping lightly against the polished floor. A casual kind of authority in his stride that hadn't yet been challenged. "I asked you something," he said, louder this time, drawing more attention, more eyes turning toward the exchange, conversations fading into the background as the room subtly shifted its focus. "We've got protocols here. Identification. Unit. Call sign. You can't just walk in and stand there like you own the place." And still, Reeves didn't react, not right away, his hands resting loosely at his sides, fingers steady, no tremor, no hesitation, just that same unreadable calm, the kind that didn't push back but didn't yield either. And somewhere near the far console, a young airman hesitated, glancing between the lieutenant and the old man, a faint crease forming in his brow as if something about the scene didn't quite line up, like a detail out of place in an otherwise perfect system, but he said nothing, because no one ever spoke first in moments like this, not when rank was involved, not when the outcome seemed obvious, and that assumption hung in the air, thick and comfortable, until Cole let out a short laugh, shaking his head slightly. "Let me guess," he added, voice dripping with casual mockery, "you've got some old school name, something nobody uses anymore, right? Go ahead. Let's hear it." And that was when Reeves finally moved, not much, just a small shift of his head, his gaze lifting to meet the lieutenant's eyes, steady and unhurried, the kind of look that didn't challenge but didn't accept either, a look that carried history without ever needing to explain it. And for a fraction of a second, something in the room seemed to pause, like the hum of the systems had dipped just slightly, like the air itself had tightened, but it passed so quickly no one could name it, no one except perhaps that same airman, who felt it without understanding why. And then Reeves spoke, his voice low, almost quiet enough to miss if you weren't listening. "Ghost lead." For a moment, nothing happened, and that was the strangest part, because in a room built on constant feedback, on blinking indicators and scrolling data, silence did not belong, yet it settled in anyway, subtle at first, like a delay no one could quite explain, the kind that made people glance at screens just to confirm everything was still running. And then one of the monitors flickered, not dramatically, just a brief stutter in the corner display, a tiny shift in color that most would have missed, but not the airman at the far console, his eyes narrowing as he leaned closer, fingers hovering over the keyboard without touching it, because the system had not asked for input, had not prompted a command, and yet something was changing, a small notification appearing where none should be, a line of text forming slowly, deliberately, as if the system itself was deciding what to say. And then the color shifted again, blue to amber, amber to red, not flashing, not alarmed, just steady, deliberate, unmistakable, and the low hum of the room seemed to deepen, a subtle vibration through the floor, through the consoles, through the air itself, like the building was acknowledging something none of them had authorized. And the conversation stopped, one by one, not because anyone told them to, but because something in the atmosphere made noise feel inappropriate. Lieutenant Cole's smirk faded just slightly, his posture stiffening as his eyes darted toward the nearest screen, then back to Reeves, then back again, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he thought he understood. "What did you just say?" he asked, but this time the edge in his voice was thinner, less certain, as if the question was no longer rhetorical, as if it carried weight he had not intended to give it, and across the room another screen shifted, then another, each one echoing the same change, red banners appearing without warning, system layers opening that were not part of the standard interface, secure channels activating without a single key pressed, and somewhere overhead, a soft tone sounded, not loud, not urgent, just present, a single note that lingered long enough to be felt more than heard, and the airman finally spoke. His voice low but steady, "Lieutenant. I did not enter anything," and that was when the room truly changed, because this was not a malfunction, not a glitch, this was recognition, the system responding to something it had been waiting for, something it had been programmed to acknowledge without human instruction, and Cole took a step back without realizing it, his confidence recalibrating in real time. The narrative slipping out of his control as he watched the screens confirm what he could not yet understand, while Daniel Reeves remained exactly where he was, unmoved, his expression unchanged, as if none of this surprised him, as if he had seen it before, not the technology, not the screens, but the moment itself, the shift when noise gave way to silence, when certainty gave way to something heavier, something earned, and in that quiet, the distance between rank and reality began to close, slowly, unmistakably, until no one in the room was laughing anymore. The red indicators did not flash or blink out of control, they held steady, unwavering, as if the system itself had shifted into a different mode, one that no longer required permission or confirmation, and across the room the consoles began to reorganize, windows minimizing on their own, secure layers rising to the surface with a quiet precision that felt intentional, controlled, and far beyond anything triggered by routine input, while the soft tone overhead repeated once more, not louder, not urgent, just present, like a signal acknowledging that something irreversible had already begun, and the airman at the far console swallowed hard, his eyes scanning the data streams that were now populating faster than he could track, encrypted channels opening, priority flags appearing in corners of the display he had never accessed before, his training telling him to act, to respond, but his instincts telling him to wait, because this was not something you interrupted, not something you corrected, and beside him another operator leaned in, whispering under his breath, "This is not part of the drill," and that quiet admission carried further than intended, reaching Lieutenant Cole just as he turned sharply toward the main console, his voice cutting through the silence again, but this time it lacked the easy confidence from before. "Override it," he said, firm but strained, "shut it down," yet no one moved, not immediately, because every screen in the room now displayed the same message, a secure header stamped across the top, classification levels rising line by line, access tiers unlocking that did not belong to anyone currently present, and then the text shifted again, not scrolling, not updating in bursts, but appearing with a deliberate clarity, as if being revealed rather than generated, and the airman read it out loud without meaning to, his voice barely above a whisper, "Legacy channel recognized. Authentication verified," and the words hung there, heavy, undeniable. While Cole's jaw tightened, his mind racing to catch up with a situation that had already moved beyond his control, verified by what, he demanded, but there was no answer, at least not from the system, because whatever had triggered this did not require explanation, it required acknowledgement, and slowly, almost reluctantly, his gaze shifted back to Daniel Reeves, who still had not moved, still stood exactly where he had been when the room first fell quiet, his presence now carrying a weight that had not been visible before, not because he had changed, but because everyone else had finally begun to see him differently, and in that moment the hierarchy of the room felt unstable, like something fundamental had shifted beneath their feet, something that could not be corrected with orders or protocol, and near the entrance, the door sensor clicked softly, a sound so small it might have gone unnoticed under normal circumstances, but now it echoed through the silence, drawing every eye toward it as the heavy door began to open with controlled precision, revealing a figure stepping inside without hesitation, uniform sharp, presence unmistakable, and the moment he crossed the threshold, the room seemed to straighten around him, not by command, not by instruction, but by instinct alone. The moment the door opened fully, the subtle hum of the room seemed to shift in tone, not louder, not softer, but sharper, as if every system had recalibrated to acknowledge the presence that had just entered, and General Whitaker did not hesitate as he stepped inside, his stride measured, deliberate, each movement carrying a quiet authority that did not need to announce itself, his uniform immaculate, every line precise. But it was not the rank on his chest that changed the room, it was the way the air itself seemed to align around him. Conversations that had already died now felt impossible to restart, and even the screens, still glowing red with secure alerts, seemed to hold their state as if waiting, while Lieutenant Cole straightened instinctively, his posture snapping into form before his thoughts could catch up. "Sir," he began, voice firm but edged with uncertainty, "we have an unexpected system activation." I was just about to, but the general did not look at him, not even for a second. His focus fixed beyond, past the consoles, past the operators, landing directly on Daniel Reeves, and that silence, that deliberate choice not to acknowledge the explanation, carried more weight than any interruption could have, because it made one thing clear without a single word: this was not about a system failure, and it was not about the lieutenant, and for the first time since the alert had triggered, the room understood that something else was in control, something older than their procedures, something that did not need validation. And Whitaker slowed as he approached, not rushed, not dramatic, just precise, his eyes locked on Reeves with a recognition that was immediate and absolute, and when he stopped, just a few feet away, the distance between them felt deliberate, measured like a line that should not be crossed casually, and for a brief second, no one moved, no one spoke, the entire room suspended in a moment that felt heavier than anything that had come before. And then, without announcement, without command, the general straightened fully and raised his hand in a clean, unmistakable salute, sharp and held, not as a gesture of protocol, but as an acknowledgement, and the effect was immediate, because in that instant the hierarchy of the room inverted, not visibly, not dramatically, but undeniably, as every person present understood that whatever they had assumed about the man standing in front of them had been incomplete. And Lieutenant Cole felt it before he could process it, the shift hitting him not as a shock, but as a quiet realization that his earlier words now carried a different weight, one that could not be taken back or reframed. And around the room, one by one, others followed, not because they were ordered to, but because the moment demanded it, posture tightening, movement aligning, the silence deepening into something respectful, something earned. And still, Daniel Reeves did not move immediately, his gaze steady, his expression unchanged, as if this response, this recognition, was not unexpected, not new, just another echo of something long established. And when he finally lifted his hand in return, the motion was calm, unhurried, the kind of salute that carried no need for validation, only acknowledgement. And as the general lowered his hand, his voice came low and firm, cutting through the silence with clarity. "Stand down," he said, not loudly, not forcefully, but with a certainty that left no room for interpretation. And the red screens remained, the alert still active, but the tension that had filled the room moments before had shifted into something else entirely, something quieter, heavier, and far more difficult to ignore. The word "stand down" settled into the room like a command that did not need repetition, and one by one the tension that had been coiled tight in shoulders and voices began to release, not completely, not comfortably, but enough for movement to return, for breath to deepen, for eyes to shift from the glowing red screens back to the man at the center of it all, because now there was no ignoring it, no dismissing what had just happened as a system error or an overreaction. The alert was still active, the secure layers still open, and yet the urgency had transformed into something quieter, something that demanded understanding rather than action. And Lieutenant Cole remained where he was, posture rigid, mind catching up in fragments, replaying the last few minutes with a clarity that only came after control had already been lost, his earlier laughter now echoing differently in his own head, stripped of confidence, replaced with a realization that settled heavier with each passing second. And he glanced toward the nearest console again, as if hoping for a different explanation to appear, but the text remained unchanged, steady, undeniable, while across the room the young airman finally stepped back from his station, not out of fear, but out of respect for something he did not yet fully understand, his eyes shifting between the general and Reeves, searching for context, for a clue that would connect the system's response to the man who had spoken just 2 words. And General Whitaker lowered his hand slowly, his gaze never leaving Reeves, the silence between them carrying a familiarity that did not need to be spoken aloud. And when he finally did speak, his voice was calm, measured, carrying the weight of certainty without the need for volume. "You took your time," he said, And there was no accusation in it, no impatience, just acknowledgement, as if this moment had been expected long before anyone else in the room realized it was possible, and Reeves gave the smallest nod in return, a gesture so subtle it might have been missed if the room had not been completely still. "It was not the system I was waiting on," he replied, his voice even, grounded. And that answer seemed to settle something unseen, something beyond the screens and protocols, while Whitaker shifted his stance slightly, turning just enough for his presence to extend outward to the rest of the room without breaking that line of focus, and when he spoke again, it was not directed at Reeves, but at everyone else. "What you are seeing is not an error," he said, each word precise, deliberate. "It is a recognition protocol that has not been triggered in over 3 decades. And that statement landed differently than anything before it, because it reframed the entire moment, turning confusion into context, turning uncertainty into something far more significant, and Cole felt it immediately, the weight of time implied in those words pressing against the assumptions he had carried only minutes earlier, and for the first time, he did not speak, did not question, because whatever explanation he might have offered no longer fit the reality in front of him, and around him the others held their positions, not frozen now, but attentive, aware that they were witnessing something that did not belong to their normal routines, something that existed outside the boundaries of their training, and in the center of it all, Daniel Reeves remained still, not elevated, not changed, simply recognized, and that difference, subtle as it was, carried more impact than any display of authority ever could. The words recognition protocol lingered in the air, heavier than any alert or command, because they implied something far beyond a simple system response, something built intentionally, preserved quietly, and forgotten by everyone except the one man standing at the center of it, and the room absorbed it slowly, each person recalibrating their understanding in real time, their training offering no reference point for what they were witnessing, while the red banners across the screens remained steady, no longer alarming, but present, like a signal that had completed its purpose and now waited for acknowledgement. And the young airman found himself stepping closer again, drawn not by curiosity alone, but by a need to understand, his eyes scanning the data more carefully now, noticing details he had missed before, timestamps that did not align with recent activity, authorization chains that traced back decades, system layers marked with classifications he had only seen in archived training modules, and his voice, when it finally came, was quieter, more deliberate. "Sir, this protocol, it is not listed in any current operational manual," and Whitaker gave a slight nod, as if that observation was expected. "It would not be," he replied, his tone steady, carrying no hint of explanation beyond what was necessary. "It predates every system you see in this room." And that statement shifted the perspective again, pulling the moment out of the present and anchoring it somewhere deeper, somewhere older, where systems were not built for efficiency alone, but for contingency, for moments that could not be predicted, only prepared for, and Lieutenant Cole felt that shift settle into him, not as a correction, but as a realization, his earlier assumptions now clearly misaligned with the reality unfolding in front of him, and he glanced once more at Reeves. But this time there was no challenge in his gaze, no trace of mockery, only a quiet attempt to reconcile the man he thought he had seen with the one now standing before him, unchanged yet completely different. And across the room, the soft tone that had echoed earlier faded into silence, its purpose fulfilled, leaving behind a stillness that felt intentional rather than empty, while the systems continued to hold their state, waiting, not for input, but for direction, and Whitaker shifted his attention back to Reeves fully now, the rest of the room fading into the background of that exchange. "We kept it active," he said, not as a report, but as a statement of continuity, just in case, and Reeves exhaled slowly, not with relief, not with tension, but with the quiet acknowledgement of something that had endured beyond expectation. "Most people would not," he answered, his voice calm, carrying a weight that suggested experience rather than surprise, and Whitaker allowed the smallest trace of a smile to appear, brief, restrained. "Most people were not there," he replied, and that single line carried more history than any explanation could have provided, a shared understanding that did not need to be unpacked, because its meaning was not meant for the room, and yet the room felt it anyway, the presence of something larger than the moment, something that extended beyond the walls of the control center, beyond the systems and ranks and procedures, into a past that still held influence over the present, and for the first time since the alert had triggered, no one was looking at the screens anymore, because whatever they had been searching for there had already been answered standing in front of them, steady, silent, and finally understood. The silence did not break, it settled deeper, more defined, as if the room itself had accepted a new order that no one had formally announced, and the weight of that realization moved through each person differently, some standing straighter without thinking, others lowering their gaze just slightly, not out of submission, but out of recognition that something beyond their understanding had just taken place. And Lieutenant Cole remained still, his earlier confidence now replaced with a quiet awareness that his role in the moment had changed, not diminished, but clarified, as if the boundaries of what he knew had been drawn more sharply in front of him, and he took a slow breath, steadying himself before finally speaking again, his voice controlled, respectful now, "Sir, permission to ask," and Whitaker shifted his gaze just enough to acknowledge him, a small movement that carried approval without interrupting the gravity of the moment. "Granted," he said, and Cole hesitated for half a second, choosing his words carefully. What exactly does the protocol recognize? And the question hung in the air, not as a challenge, but as a request for understanding, and Whitaker did not answer immediately, his eyes returning to Reeves, as if confirming that the response belonged to the moment as much as it did to the room, and Reeves gave the slightest nod, not granting permission, but acknowledging the necessity of the answer, and only then did Whitaker speak, his voice even, grounded. "It recognizes authority that is not listed in any current chain of command," and that sentence carried more weight than its length suggested, because it redefined everything they had been trained to rely on, everything that structured their understanding of rank and access. And across the room the operators absorbed it in silence, their minds adjusting to a concept that did not fit neatly into any manual or procedure, while the young airman felt a quiet shift in his perspective, realizing that the systems he trusted were not just tools of the present, but guardians of something older, something preserved for moments like this, and Cole nodded slowly, the implications settling in, and it responded automatically, he said, more to himself than anyone else. And Whitaker confirmed it with a brief glance toward the still glowing screens. "It does not wait for approval," he replied, "it identifies, and it acts," and that distinction landed clearly, because it meant the system had not been activated by Reeves in the way they understood activation, it had responded to him, and that difference changed everything, and for a moment no one spoke again, the room holding that understanding in a shared silence, until Reeves finally shifted his weight slightly, the smallest movement, but enough to draw attention back to him, not because he demanded it, but because it naturally followed, and when he spoke, his voice was as steady as before. "It was never meant to be used often," he said, not explaining, not justifying, simply stating a fact, and Whitaker gave a quiet nod in agreement. "It was meant to be used when it mattered," he added, and that final piece settled into place, completing the picture without needing further detail, and around them the systems continued to hold their state, not urgent, not intrusive, just present, as if waiting for the next step, but no one moved to give it, because for the first time, action was no longer the priority, understanding was, and in that understanding, the room found a new kind of stillness, one that carried respect, awareness, and a quiet acknowledgement that some things did not need to be explained to be recognized. The systems did not shut down immediately, and that in itself felt intentional, as if the room was being given time to absorb what had just unfolded before returning to routine, the red indicators still present but no longer commanding attention, their purpose fulfilled, their message delivered, and one by one the operators began to step back from their consoles, not disengaging, but easing out of the tension that had held them in place, their movements quieter now, more deliberate, as if the space itself demanded a different kind of awareness, while Lieutenant Cole stood where he was, the weight of the moment still settling into him, not as embarrassment, not as fear, but as clarity, a realization that came not from being corrected, but from seeing something he had never been taught to expect, and he finally took a measured step forward, not toward control, but toward understanding, stopping just short of where Reeves stood, his posture no longer rigid, but grounded, respectful in a way that did not need to be announced. "Sir," he said, and the word carried a different meaning now, not tied to rank, but to recognition, and Reeves met his gaze without hesitation, his expression unchanged, steady as it had been from the beginning. "I did not know," Cole continued, his voice even, not apologizing, not explaining, simply stating the truth as he now understood it, and Reeves gave a small nod, acknowledging the statement without judgment. "You were not meant to," he replied. And that answer carried no distance, no dismissal, only a quiet acceptance of the difference between experience and instruction, and across the room, the young airman watched the exchange closely, something shifting in his own understanding as well, because this was not a correction enforced by authority, it was a moment of alignment, of learning that did not come from a manual, but from witnessing something real, something earned, and General Whitaker observed it all without interruption, his presence still anchoring the room, but no longer directing it, as if the moment had moved beyond command and into something more foundational, and after a brief pause, he turned slightly toward the main console, his voice calm as he addressed the operators. "Return systems to standard state," he said, and this time, the room responded immediately, not out of urgency, but out of readiness, fingers moving across keyboards, commands entered with precision, and the red indicators began to fade, not abruptly, but gradually. Layers closing, channels securing, until the screens returned to their normal configuration, the hum of the room shifting back to its familiar rhythm, steady, controlled, but something had changed, something that would not reset with the systems, and as the final alert cleared, Whitaker looked back to Reeves once more. "We will need to update the current chain of awareness," he said, not as an order, but as a recognition of what the moment required moving forward, and Reeves considered that for a second, his gaze briefly shifting across the room, taking in the faces that now looked at him not with curiosity, but with respect, before returning to Whitaker. "Awareness is enough," he answered, his voice quiet, certain, and Whitaker held that for a moment, then gave a single nod, understanding without needing to expand on it, and in that exchange, the final piece of the moment settled into place, not in the systems, not in the procedures, but in the people, who now carried something forward that could not be programmed, only remembered. The room returned to its normal rhythm, but it was not the same room anymore, not in the way that mattered, because while the screens had reset and the systems had resumed their quiet flow of data, something unseen had shifted beneath it all, something that would not appear in any report or log, something carried instead in the way people stood, in the way they looked at one another, in the way silence now held meaning instead of emptiness. And Daniel Reeves remained where he was for a moment longer, not out of hesitation, but because there was no urgency left in the space, no need to move quickly, no need to assert anything further. The moment had already completed itself, and General Whitaker watched him with that same steady recognition, understanding that nothing more needed to be said between them, not here, not now. And after a quiet second, Reeves turned slightly, his gaze passing once more across the room, not searching, not evaluating, just acknowledging, and as he did, the young airman instinctively straightened, not out of protocol, but out of respect that had formed without instruction, and even Lieutenant Cole, who had stood closest to the shift from the beginning, held his position with a new kind of awareness, one that did not rely on rank or expectation, but on understanding earned in a single moment. And Reeves gave the smallest nod, not directed at anyone in particular, but received by all of them, a simple acknowledgement that required no words, and then he began to walk, his steps quiet against the floor, unhurried, moving toward the exit without drawing attention, yet impossible to ignore, and as he passed by, the room seemed to follow him in silence, not turning, not staring, but aware, fully present in the fact that they had just witnessed something that would not be repeated, something that existed outside routine, outside training, and as the door opened for him once more, the same soft sound marking his departure, Whitaker remained still, his gaze following just long enough to confirm what he already knew, before turning back to the room, not to command, but to observe, to ensure that what had just happened had been understood, and he saw it immediately, not in words, not in gestures, but in the quiet discipline that now carried a different weight, and without raising his voice, without shifting his tone, he spoke once more. "Remember this," he said, and the words settled into the room with the same certainty as before, not as an order, but as a directive that would outlast the moment itself, and no one responded, no one needed to, because the understanding was already there, already anchored in something deeper than instruction, and as the systems continued their steady hum, as the screens displayed their familiar patterns once again, the room carried forward with its duties, but not unchanged, because somewhere between a question asked in jest and a response given in quiet certainty, something had been revealed, something that could not be measured or recorded, only remembered, and in that memory, a simple truth remained, steady and unspoken, that respect was not assigned by rank, and it was not granted by position, it was recognized. Often too late, but never without consequence.